32 teams, 7 rounds, 257 picks. And somehow, every single year, the NFL draft manages to completely lose its mind. We're talking about a league that has more data, more film study, more analytics, more sports scientists, more sleep consultants, more everything than any other sports organization in human history, and yet, year after year, they get it spectacularly, embarrassingly wrong. Not just a little wrong. Not oops, that guy was a second-round talent and we took him in the first wrong. We're talking about teams passing on Hall of Famers to pick guys who couldn't make a practice squad. Teams spending their entire future on quarterbacks who never started a single NFL game. Teams so convinced they found the next great thing that they ignored every single warning sign sitting right in front of them. And here's the part that nobody talks about. It's getting worse. The more information teams have, the worse their decisions seem to get. The more money they pour into scouting, the more catastrophic the busts become. It's like the NFL draft is this strange, twisted dimension where logic goes to die, where smart people make dumb choices, and where franchises bet their entire existence on a 22-year-old kid they've spoken to for exactly 15 minutes at a combine in Indianapolis. So today, we're going inside that madness. We're going to walk through the history of the draft, the disasters, the miracles, the moments that changed everything, and we're going to figure out one question that nobody has ever been able to fully answer. Why does the NFL draft keep losing its mind? And why do we absolutely love watching it happen? Let's go. Picture this. It's 1936. The NFL is barely holding itself together as a league. Teams are struggling to find players, struggling to survive, struggling to matter in a sports world dominated by baseball. And one man, a man named Bert Bell, owner of the Philadelphia Eagles, a team so bad they couldn't fill a high school gym, walks into a meeting and says, "I have an idea." His idea was simple. The worst teams pick first. That's it. That's the whole thing. You finish last, you get first pick of the best college players. You finish first, you wait till the end. A system designed to bring balance, to give hope to the hopeless, to make sure that no dynasty could just keep getting richer while everyone else starved. It was, genuinely, a brilliant idea. And for the better part of 50 years, it worked exactly the way it was supposed to work. Bad teams drafted well, improved, became good teams. Good teams drafted late, had to work harder, stayed humble. The whole league stayed competitive, stayed interesting, stayed watchable. But then something happened. Slowly, quietly, the draft stopped being just a mechanism for balance and turned into something else entirely. It became theater. It became drama. It became the most watched, most discussed, most obsessed over event in American sports. A 3-day spectacle where millions of people tune in to watch men in suits read names off cards. And somewhere in that transformation, everything started going sideways. Let's talk about quarterbacks. Because you cannot talk about NFL draft madness without talking about quarterbacks. The quarterback position in football is unlike anything else in professional sports. No other position in any other sport carries this kind of weight, this kind of pressure, this kind of franchise-altering importance. A great quarterback doesn't just make a team better, a great quarterback makes a team. He is the team. He's the face, the leader, the decision-maker, the person every play flows through. Which means finding a great quarterback is the single most important thing any NFL front office can do. And which means, logically, that you'd think teams would be very, very careful about how they evaluate them. You would be wrong. Dead wrong. In 2000, 6 quarterbacks were taken in the first round of the NFL draft. 6. Chad Pennington, Giovanni Carmazzi, Chris Redman, T. Martin, Mark Bulger, and Spurgeon Wynn. You know who wasn't taken in the first round that year? Tom Brady. A quarterback out of Michigan who had done nothing but win games, who had proven himself in pressure situations, who had competed for his starting job and won, taken in the 6th round. Pick 199. 6 quarterbacks went before him in round 1 alone. Every single team in the league passed on him. Not once. Multiple times. And Tom Brady went on to win 7 Super Bowls. 7. More than any other player in NFL history. More than any franchise in NFL history, period. Meanwhile, Spurgeon Wynn, the guy Cleveland took in the 6th round just a few picks before Brady, completed less than half his passes in the NFL and was out of the league in 3 years. Now you might be thinking, okay, that's one mistake. That's one weird case. Teams couldn't have known. But that's exactly the problem. Because it wasn't one weird case. It was a pattern. A pattern that has repeated itself over and over and over again in the most expensive, most scrutinized, most data-driven talent evaluation process in human history. Let's go back even further. Because the quarterback disaster didn't start in 2000. It started way before that. In 1983, the NFL draft produced what everyone calls the greatest quarterback class in NFL history. 6 quarterbacks taken in the first round: John Elway, Todd Blackledge, Jim Kelly, Tony Eason, Ken O'Brien, Dan Marino. 4 of those 6 quarterbacks made the Pro Bowl. 2 of them are in the Hall of Fame. But here's what nobody remembers about that draft. Dan Marino was taken 27th. 27th. After 5 other quarterbacks. After teams had already made their choice and moved on. Why? Because there were rumors. Whispers. Someone said Marino had a drug problem. Someone said his arm wasn't strong enough. Someone said he wasn't a leader. Someone said something, and 26 teams believed it enough to pass on the man who went on to throw for more touchdowns than anyone in NFL history at the time. He never won a Super Bowl, which is its own tragedy, but the fact that 26 teams looked at Dan Marino and said not for us is one of the most stunning pieces of collective failure in sports history. And the team that took him? Miami. A team that had just won the Super Bowl. A team that didn't even need a quarterback. A team that almost didn't draft him at all. They got lucky. Pure luck. Here's a question for you. What would you pay for certainty? If I could tell you, with 100% accuracy, which player was going to be great and which was going to be a bust, what would that information be worth to you? In the NFL, that information would be worth billions. Literally billions of dollars. Championships. Legacies. Entire franchises built or destroyed. So teams have poured enormous resources into finding it. Scouts who travel the country watching practices. Analytics departments crunching numbers around the clock. Psychologists running personality tests. Neurologists checking reaction times. Medical staffs performing physical examinations so detailed they'd make your regular doctor feel inadequate. They have the Wonderlic test, a 50-question intelligence test players have been taking since 1970. They have the 40-yard dash, a speed measurement that teams obsess over even though, as multiple studies have shown, it has almost no correlation to NFL success. They have the vertical jump, the broad jump, the 3-cone drill, the shuttle run. They have hand size measurements taken to the 10th of an inch. They have arm length measurements. They have interviews where they ask players to describe themselves as an animal and then seriously discuss the answer in draft meetings. They have everything. And they still get it wrong, constantly, at breathtaking scale. In 2017, DeShone Kizer was considered a first-round talent by multiple teams. Cleveland took him in the second round and started him immediately as a rookie. He finished the season with 22 interceptions and a 0-15 record as a starter. In 2021, the San Francisco 49ers traded 3 first-round picks and a third-round pick to move up and select Trey Lance third overall. They gave up an extraordinary amount of future talent, players who hadn't been drafted yet, who existed only as future possibilities, to make sure they got their guy. Trey Lance started 11 games for the 49ers. Total. He suffered 2 separate injuries, struggled whenever he played, and was eventually traded to the Dallas Cowboys, where he also struggled. The 49ers, meanwhile, watched the picks they traded away turn into other teams' contributors while they searched desperately for a quarterback solution. It's not that the 49ers were dumb. They're actually considered one of the smarter organizations in football. Head coach Kyle Shanahan is widely regarded as one of the best offensive minds in the game. And they still got it catastrophically wrong. Let's pause here for a second. Because I want you to really feel what's happening in these draft rooms. Imagine you're the general manager of an NFL team. You've been building toward this moment for months. Your scouts have watched thousands of hours of film. Your coaching staff has spent weeks debating every possible scenario. You've flown players in for private workouts. You've had dinners, meetings, phone calls. You've built mock draft boards that fill entire walls of your war room. And now it's draft day. The clock is ticking. 10 minutes on the clock. Then 5. Then 2. Your owner is sitting behind you. Your coaches are leaning in. Your scouts are watching from the periphery. And you have to make a decision that will define your tenure with this franchise, that will either make you a genius or a cautionary tale, with incomplete information, under enormous pressure about a 22-year-old kid you've met twice. That's the reality of the NFL draft. And somehow, in that reality, teams are still expected to be right most of the time. The truly wild part. In round 1, where players are paid the most and expectations are highest, teams hit on their picks, meaning the player becomes at least a solid starter, roughly 50 to 60% of the time. Flip a coin. You'll be right about as often. Now let's talk about the other side of this. The players. Because we spend so much time talking about teams, we forget that there are actual human beings at the center of all this madness. Young men who have spent their entire lives working toward this single moment, 3 days in April when their phone might ring and change everything. Or might not ring at all. Consider the experience of going undrafted. You've played college football at a high level. Maybe you were a starter. Maybe you were even good. And you sit through 7 rounds, hundreds of picks, and your name never comes up. The phone never rings. The dream you've been chasing since you were 8 years old quietly evaporates in real time while the whole country watches. That is an experience that defies description. But then consider what happens after that. Kurt Warner went undrafted. He stocked shelves at a grocery store. He played in the Arena Football League, indoors, on a much smaller field, for almost nothing. He was 30 when he finally got his chance with the St. Louis Rams, stepping in when the starter got hurt in 1999. He won the Super Bowl that year. Won the Super Bowl MVP. Won the league MVP. And became one of the most beloved quarterbacks in NFL history. The same draft process that produced the 6 first-round quarterbacks who weren't Tom Brady, the process that passed on Dan Marino 26 times, completely missed Kurt Warner because he went to Northern Iowa instead of a powerhouse program. The system didn't just fail. It failed completely, totally, and spectacularly, and the guy who slipped through the cracks became a Hall of Famer. All right. Let's talk about something that changed everything. The year is 1994. The Dallas Cowboys, coming off back-to-back Super Bowl championships, are considered the most dominant team in football. Their scouting department, led by a man named Gil Brandt, is legendary. Their ability to find talent, not just in the first round, but throughout the draft, is considered the gold standard. And that year, something shifts. Teams start paying attention not just to who Dallas drafts, but how they draft. How they build their boards. How they think about value at different rounds. How they approach the whole process strategically rather than emotionally. And out of that observation emerges, slowly, a new philosophy. The idea that the draft is not just about finding good players, it's about finding good players at the right price. In the NFL, every pick in the draft comes with a rookie contract. First-round picks are expensive. The first overall pick is extraordinarily expensive. But a 7th-round pick costs almost nothing. So here's the question someone eventually started asking: what if a 7th-round player is just as good as a first-round player? What if the difference between them isn't talent, but perception? What if teams are paying a massive premium for a label, first-round pick, rather than for actual ability? This sounds obvious in retrospect. But it was revolutionary at the time. And it led to what might be the single most important draft in history. New England Patriots. Head coach Bill Belichick in just his first season. The Patriots finished the 2000 season 5-11. Terrible. But they have the 6th overall pick in the next draft. They take a quarterback. Drew Bledsoe was their starter, so they weren't looking for a quarterback. They used that pick on the best available player. Meanwhile, in the 6th round, with the 199th pick, they take a quarterback from Michigan. A kid with a good arm, a football brain, incredible competitiveness, and absolutely no hype whatsoever. Tom Brady. Now, the Patriots didn't know what Brady was. Nobody did. They took a flyer on him the same way every team takes flyers on 6th-round picks, hoping for a miracle, not expecting one. But when Drew Bledsoe went down with an injury in 2001 and Brady stepped in, something clicked immediately. He was calm. He was smart. He made the right decisions. He won. The Patriots won the Super Bowl that year. And again. And again. And again and again and again until Brady finally left for Tampa Bay and won one more time just to prove the point. And the single biggest reason any of that happened, the reason the Patriots became the greatest dynasty in NFL history, was that one 6th-round pick. One decision that cost almost nothing. One player that every other team in the league passed on repeatedly. So now we have to ask the uncomfortable question. If Brady slipped to 199 despite being clearly elite, if Warner went completely undrafted, if Marino nearly didn't get drafted at all, what does that tell us about the entire evaluation process? It tells us that the NFL draft, at its core, is not actually a talent evaluation exercise. It's a confidence exercise. Teams aren't really asking, is this player good? They're asking, am I willing to be judged if this player isn't good? There's a psychological principle called loss aversion, the idea that humans feel losses much more painfully than they feel equivalent gains. Losing $100 feels worse than gaining $100 feels good, even though mathematically they're the same. In the NFL draft, this plays out in a fascinating way. Teams are terrified of drafting the wrong player in the first round, the bust, because that failure is visible, obvious, and career-damaging. So they gravitate towards safe picks. Picks they can defend. Picks that make sense on paper. But the greatest players in history weren't safe picks. They were weird picks, overlooked picks, sixth-round picks, undrafted afterthoughts. The teams that found them weren't smarter, they were just less afraid of being wrong. Let's talk about the trade. Because no conversation about NFL draft madness is complete without talking about the trade. Every few years, a team decides that they have found their franchise quarterback. The guy. The answer. The player who is going to deliver them to glory. And they want him so badly, so desperately, that they are willing to pay almost any price to move up and get him. These trades are almost always disasters. In 1999, the Cleveland Browns, a brand new expansion team, just entering the league, traded away their first-round pick and other assets to move up and select Tim Couch first overall. Couch was a talented quarterback out of Kentucky who had put up enormous college numbers. He started 72 games for Cleveland. The Browns went 22-50 in those games. He was injury-prone, inconsistent, and never lived up to the promise of being the first overall pick. He was released after 5 seasons and never played in the NFL again. Cleveland would spend the next 2 decades desperately searching for a quarterback solution. They drafted Brady Quinn. They drafted Colt McCoy. They drafted Brandon Weeden, at 28 years old, an age when most quarterbacks are already in their prime. They drafted Johnny Manziel, one of the most spectacular busts in league history. Every few years, a new answer. Every few years, the same result. And each of those failed quarterbacks represented not just a missed pick, but a missed opportunity, a chance to draft other players, build other positions, construct a team that could actually win. The quarterback obsession didn't just cost Cleveland quarterbacks. It cost them everything around the quarterback too. Now let's talk about Johnny Manziel specifically. Because Johnny Manziel deserves his own chapter. In 2012, Johnny Manziel became the first freshman in history to win the Heisman Trophy. He was electric. He was unpredictable. He made plays that had no business working, scrambling out of trouble, throwing off platform, turning broken plays into touchdowns with pure instinct and athletic genius. He was also, and scouts knew this, a serious risk. Off-field concerns. Lifestyle questions. Character flags. The kind of things that, in any normal evaluation process, would at minimum slow a team down and make them think hard about whether this was a calculated risk or an avoidable disaster. Cleveland took him 22nd overall in 2014. They knew the risks. They had done the research. And they decided that the talent was worth it. Johnny Manziel played 14 games for Cleveland. He threw 7 touchdowns and 7 interceptions. He was late to meetings. He showed up to games unprepared. He was caught partying in Las Vegas during the season, wearing a disguise. He was released after 2 seasons and never played in the NFL again. This is not a story about a bad person. Manziel clearly struggled with things that go beyond football, and whatever path he's been on since the NFL, I genuinely wish him well. But as a draft story, it's perfect. Because it illustrates exactly what happens when a team so desperately wants something to be true that it ignores everything telling them it isn't. Cleveland wanted Manziel to be the answer. They needed him to be. They looked at all the warning signs and told themselves a story where those warning signs didn't matter. They were wrong. Let's flip to the other side now. Let's talk about the teams that got it right. Because in all this madness, in all these disasters, there are franchises that have somehow figured out a better way. The Kansas City Chiefs, leading up to the 2017 draft, had a decision to make. They had Patrick Mahomes available, a quarterback from Texas Tech who had thrown for over 5,000 yards in college, but who had also run an offense that didn't look anything like what most NFL teams ran. He was a project, people said. He needed time to develop. You couldn't start him right away. Kansas City traded up to get him. Took him 10th overall. Then did something almost no team ever does. They sat him for a full year. Let him learn. Let him watch. Let him absorb the playbook and the speed of the NFL before asking him to perform in it. In year 2, Mahomes started every game. He threw 50 touchdowns and only 12 interceptions. He won the MVP award. He has since won multiple Super Bowls and is considered by many to be the best quarterback in football today. The Chiefs didn't just draft well. They managed the pick well. They had patience in a league that almost never has patience. They trusted their process even when the rest of the league was questioning it. That's rare. That's genuinely rare. Here's another thing that never gets talked about enough. The players who were never given a chance. Not the busts. Not the guys who got drafted high and failed. The ones who were dismissed before they even got in the door. In 2013, a defensive end out of Missouri named Michael Sam came out as gay, becoming the first openly gay player to enter the NFL draft. He had won the SEC Defensive Player of the Year award. He was, by pure football measure, a legitimate prospect. He was drafted in the 7th round, last round, one of the final picks of the entire draft. And then, before he ever played a regular season game, he was released. By the Rams. By the Cowboys. By the CFL team he eventually played for. Did Michael Sam not make the NFL because he wasn't good enough? Maybe. 7th round picks rarely stick around. But the question that lingers is, would a straight player with identical production and identical combined numbers have been taken earlier? Would he have gotten a longer look? Would teams have been more patient with his development? The draft doesn't operate in a vacuum. It operates inside a culture. And that culture has, throughout its history, carried biases about position, about race, about background, about school size, about personality, about any number of things that have nothing to do with football ability. Black quarterbacks were regularly moved to other positions for decades because scouts convinced themselves they didn't have the intelligence or the pocket mechanics to play quarterback in the NFL. This happened to players throughout the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Players who could have been great quarterbacks were turned into receivers and defensive backs because the people evaluating them couldn't see past their own assumptions. The draft has gotten better at this. The league has gotten better at this. But the history is real, and it's worth remembering. Okay. We need to talk about the Combine. The NFL Scouting Combine. Every February, roughly 300 college prospects gather in Indianapolis at Lucas Oil Stadium for the most bizarre talent evaluation ritual in professional sports. They run in shorts and t-shirts. They lift weights. They jump. They catch balls. They answer questions from coaches and scouts. They get poked and prodded by team doctors who look at their knees and hips and shoulders with an intensity usually reserved for racehorses. And then the data from all of this gets fed into decision-making processes that shape where players get drafted. The Combine has produced some legendary moments. Some players have vaulted themselves up draft boards with one great workout. Bo Jackson ran the 40 so fast at his pro day that the number seemed impossible. Des Bryant, asked about his relationship with his mother, gave an answer that was used by teams as a character red flag, even though the question itself was arguably inappropriate. But the Combine has also produced some of the most misleading information in draft history. Brady's combine numbers were terrible. Slow 40 time. Poor throw velocity measurements. He looked like a third-string backup on paper. On the field, he was the greatest of all time. Jamarcus Russell, taken first overall by Oakland in 2007, had one of the most physically impressive combine performances in history. Huge arm. Incredible size. Everything you'd want if you were designing a quarterback in a laboratory. He threw for 18 touchdowns and 23 interceptions in 3 seasons. He was out of the league by the time he was 24. He reportedly gained over 60 pounds and showed up to practices unprepared. Oakland gave up enormous resources to get him, and got almost nothing in return. The Combine measures physical traits. It measures them accurately. But football is not a physical trait. Football is decision-making under pressure, processed in fractions of a second, sustained over a full season, repeated year after year. No drill measures that. No test scores it. No doctor can look at an X-ray and tell you if someone has what it takes to handle being down by 7 with 2 minutes left in a playoff game. Let's talk about what might be the greatest draft class in NFL history. In 2004, the draft produced Phillip Rivers, Ben Roethlisberger, and Eli Manning, 3 quarterbacks who all went in the top 4 picks. All 3 went on to Super Bowls. All 3 had long, successful careers. All 3 are either in the Hall of Fame or will be discussed for it. But the real story of the 2004 draft is what happened with those first 4 picks. San Diego was picking first. They wanted Eli Manning. Manning, through his agent, announced before the draft that he didn't want to play for San Diego. The Chargers took him anyway, first overall. Then New York Giants general manager Ernie Accorsi called. He wanted Manning desperately. He had built his entire career philosophy around the idea that you cannot win championships without a franchise quarterback, and he believed Manning was the guy. They made a deal. The Giants sent their first overall pick, Philip Rivers, plus 3 additional picks to San Diego in exchange for Manning. Philip Rivers went on to be extraordinary. He's in the Hall of Fame. He threw for over 63,000 yards in his career and retired as one of the most prolific passers in NFL history. Eli Manning went on to win 2 Super Bowls, beating the New England Patriots both times as an underdog, both times with Manning playing the game of his life. He'll be in the Hall of Fame. So who won the trade? Both of them? Neither of them. The whole thing is a perfect draw, one of the few times in NFL history where a blockbuster draft trade worked out for both sides. That almost never happens. Usually, someone gets destroyed. Let me tell you about the Browns again. Because the Browns are the draft's greatest tragedy, and no story about draft madness is complete without them. Since returning as an expansion team in 1999, Cleveland has had the first overall pick 4 times. 4 times. They've had multiple top 5 picks in multiple drafts. They've drafted quarterbacks so many times that local sports radio hosts stopped being able to make new jokes about it and had to start recycling old ones. For most of those years, they were one of the worst teams in football. In 2017, they finished 0-16. A perfect season of losing. Every game. All 16. They were so bad that a group of fans organized the perfect season parade, a celebration of losing, complete with floats and costumes, held downtown Cleveland. Thousands of people showed up. Because when you've been suffering that long, sometimes you have to choose between laughing and crying, and laughing is healthier. But here's the thing about Cleveland. In 2017, new management came in with a radical idea. Instead of just using their terrible record to chase a quarterback, the thing every bad team does immediately, they were going to rebuild systematically. They were going to collect draft picks. Build through the draft. Build depth, build the line, build around the skill positions before worrying about the quarterback. They traded bad players for picks. They sat through the rebuilding years. They trusted the process. And in 2018, they drafted Baker Mayfield first overall. A quarterback, yes, but one they had built an actual team around first. Mayfield led Cleveland to their first playoff win in 18 years. Then they traded him to Carolina after things soured between him and the organization. Then they got Deshaun Watson in a trade that cost them so many draft picks that the bill will still be coming due years from now, and Watson, dealing with legal issues and injury, played a handful of games. The Browns built it right. Then tore it down chasing a shortcut. The cycle never ends. Let's zoom out one more time. We're in the 3rd decade of the 21st century now. The NFL is the most profitable sports league in American history. Every team is worth billions. The draft itself generates hundreds of millions in economic activity, hotels, restaurants, merchandise, television rights. And yet, the fundamental problem that Bert Bell's system was designed to solve, competitive balance, the ability for bad teams to get better, works imperfectly at best. Some teams are consistently excellent. New England for 2 decades. Kansas City right now. San Francisco recently. These teams draft well year after year, develop players, build cultures. Some teams are consistently terrible. They cycle through coaches, general managers, quarterbacks, systems. They draft badly, evaluate poorly, make decisions based on desperation rather than strategy. The gap between the top and the bottom in the NFL, despite everything the draft is supposed to do, remains enormous. And in many ways, it's getting bigger. The teams that are good at drafting have figured out something that bad teams haven't. It's not about the players you draft. It's about how you think, how you value, how you're willing to be different from everyone else in that room when everyone else is wrong together. The biggest threat in any draft room isn't bad information. It's groupthink. The feeling that if everyone believes something, it must be true. The pressure to conform, to take the safe pick, to avoid being the person who zigged when everyone else zagged. The greatest draft picks in history almost always had someone in some room who said, everyone else is wrong about this guy. Someone willing to be different. Someone comfortable with uncertainty. That quality, the willingness to be wrong in a crowd rather than comfortable with the crowd being wrong, is the rarest thing in football. And possibly in life. We need to talk about one more quarterback. Because I've saved the most confusing one for last. In 2021, the San Francisco 49ers had the 3rd pick in the draft and they wanted a quarterback. Their options. Trevor Lawrence, widely considered the consensus best prospect since Andrew Luck, but Jacksonville had the 1st pick and they were definitely taking him. Zach Wilson out of BYU. Trey Lance out of North Dakota State. The 49ers could have taken Wilson at 3. A safer prospect, more traditional background, more games against tougher competition. They chose Lance. Here's what made it complicated. Lance had played one game in the 2020 college season. One game. Because of COVID, North Dakota State played a limited schedule, and Lance only participated in one of those games. He was being evaluated, in significant part, on what he might become rather than what he had shown. The 49ers traded significant future assets to move up and get him. Then they waited. Then they started him. Then he got hurt. Then he came back. Then he got hurt again. Kyle Shanahan, the coach who pushed for Lance, is brilliant. His record speaks for itself. He's been to multiple Super Bowls. But on Lance, he may have seen what he wanted to see instead of what was actually there. He fell in love with the potential and underweighted the uncertainty. He paid too much and got too little. That happens to brilliant people in draft rooms every year. Intelligence doesn't protect you from wanting something to be true so badly that you convince yourself it is. Here's where we land. The NFL draft will never be solved. Not really. You can collect more data. You can hire smarter analysts. You can build better psychological profiles and more sophisticated medical evaluations. You can spend more money, invest more time, talk to more people. And at the end of all of that, you will still be sitting in a room, watching a clock tick down, making a decision about a 22-year-old that could make or break your entire franchise, with incomplete information, under enormous pressure, knowing that you will be judged forever by what you decide in the next 30 seconds. That's the NFL draft. And that's why we watch. Not because we expect it to be rational. Not because we believe the teams have all the answers. But because we know they don't. Because we know that somewhere in those 7 rounds, there is a Tom Brady sitting in the 6th round. There is a Kurt Warner who won't get drafted at all. There is a can't-miss prospect who is absolutely, definitively going to miss. We watch because the draft is the one moment in football that is completely and totally honest. The season has game plans. It has strategy and preparation and execution. The draft has all of that too, but underneath all of it, underneath all the analytics and the film study and the war rooms, there is still just a guess. A really expensive, really important, really consequential guess. And every single year, the NFL makes those guesses wrong enough times that the entire system reminds you. No matter how much money you spend, no matter how smart you are, no matter how certain you feel, you don't actually know. Nobody does. That's the madness of the NFL draft. And honestly, that's why it's beautiful.